You know, I have to admit, I wasn't very excited for Ghost of Tsushima, you know, because I saw the trailers, but the combat they showed didn't look very interesting, and the stealth looked pretty boring as well. It looked like stuff we'd seen before. And I want some evolution in the games department nowadays. Oh, this is what I look like, by the way. Especially in open world games. I'm sick of open worlds. I played Assassin's Creed Odyssey last year, and for me, it was huge, bland, and I got 14 hours in, I was just bored. And yet, I love Ghost of Tsushima. But wait a minute, Ghost is open world, and I put something like, what, 100 plus hours into it at this point? So what's going on? This doesn't make any sense. What do I do with all my angry baby gamer rage? Well, what the market failed to tell me is that 1, the combat isn't shallow and boring, and 2, in my opinion, Ghost has one of the best character-driven stories of the year. I played The Last of Us 2. I didn't like it. I didn't see the leaks. I wanted to like it. I wasn't a big fan. Some choices that, look, please don't leave the video. Most reviews for Ghost are really good. Like, critics like it, but most people seem to love it. Like, Game of the Year type love. And I was trying to think why this might be. And I've got a wee theory, right? Hear me out. I think, much to the success of The Witcher and the Game of Thrones series, Ghost of Tsushima manages to have both a very expansive and beautiful world, with rich history and all that good shit, but also has well-written, well-acted characters with subtleties and flaws. My favourite type of stories are character-driven. Ratchet & Clank, Enslaved Odyssey to the West, The Last of Us. Yeah, they all have plots, but the appeal is much more the journey with the characters and not their destination. And then there's people like my best friend, Jordan. He loves worlds and games. Halo, Fallout, fucking My Hero Academia, I don't even know what that is. They've all got grand histories. Warring clans. Politics. It's not really for me. I've enjoyed games like these, but I really need interesting characters to ground it for me first. Like, I know people like Master Chief, but is anyone really playing Halo to see his complex character arc from Green Metal Man to Greyish Green Metal Man? Probably. There's like 50 books about it, but it's not my cup of tea. I know it sounds like a pretty obvious thing to say. An interesting world with interesting characters makes something that most people will enjoy. But the thing I find about your traditional interesting world, like say Fallout or Warhammer, is usually the guy who wrote all the lore is so excited to tell you about it that it ends up drowning out what's actually important. Like, yeah, I'm sure you've got 400 in-game books about some ancient war, and you want to tell me all about Sergeant Who Gives a Shit's favourite bowl of pasta. But chances are, unless you've already really pulled me in, I do not care. The Witcher, Game of Thrones, and Ghost of Tsushima, that's what they all do differently for me. They all have this detail, but it's never in your face, and rarely, if ever, do you feel like you're losing track of what's going on because you're being distracted with lore. The Japanese love it as well. Even the creator of the Yakuza, even he called the game, quote, amazing, and expressed regret that a game of its nature wasn't made by the Japanese first. Yeah, I regret that too, but you guys seem focused on other stuff. Based on the Mongol invasion of Tsushima in 1274, you play as Jin, big fat virgin Sakai.
I'm a big, giant virgin.
Nephew of the island's Jito, Lord Shimura.
Honor. They are what make us.
You begin the game at the Battle of Komoda Beach, and in classic samurai tradition, your uncle sends his best warrior to duel the enemy.
Send your finest warrior to face me.
Before Coach Tanaka spills his drinky poo on our friend and he has a sleep. Lord Shimura is not happy about this wasted beverage or the unceremonious nap time, and dooms all his men to die in battle. Where the real battle had all 80 samurai die and the island be invaded by the Mongols, resulting in a general atmosphere of bad vibes, Jin is left as our only survivor, bar his uncle who has been captured by the Khan. Jin then wakes up after the battle to find that he's been patched up by a mysterious person who reveals herself to be Yuna, a thief who just so happens to be an amazing actress.
Bryce!
who needs our help to rescue her blacksmith brother Taka from the Mongols. Jin explains that Uncle Shugi needs his help, and so they ride headfirst towards Castle Canada.
Toward Castle Canada.
Jin is confronted by Koten Khan, suitably gets his ass whooped, and is tossed into the water in a rage. With his subsequent defeat, Yuna and Jin realise it may take more than traditional samurai tactic to take on such overwhelming odds. And so the game's first act begins, as we go in search of Tsushima's most talented warriors, who will both aid Jin in his quest to save his uncle and teach him some new techniques that may not sit very well with Jin's moral code. So the story is very simple, and as you might expect, throughout the game, Jin's willingness to stray from the samurai code and adopt more pragmatic tactics increases, changing the island, Mongols and Jin's allies' view of himself. I expected the game to unfold quite predictably, you know. I played through it with my girlfriend, and when we started we were making bets about when different characters would die. But what we originally expected to be a cliche-ridden, predictable war story actually turned into a character drama with its fair share of twists, where people turn to their worst when their home and families are torn away from them. I'll admit, when I first booted up the game, I made a note to put on the subtitles because I didn't think I'd be able to keep track of any of the Japanese names. But the characters are so memorable, I didn't have any trouble. I can list Ishikawa, Taka, Yugimoto, the gang's all there. Jin's journey from stubborn, honour-driven samurai to a pragmatic legend of Tsushima is extremely believable. It's one of the things I think a 15-hour plus game can really excel at, where a 2-hour film can't. The self-doubt and reluctance of Jin to stray from his path occurs very naturally throughout, with flashbacks to his teachings about honour occurring throughout the game as he begins to break his code. And they don't just occur in cutscenes. Hours after learning how to assassinate, I had this happen to me.
Jin. We looked him in the eye with courage. Only cowards strike from the shadows. Forgive me, Uncle.
And after that, every now and again, Jin would still mutter to himself about how it was the only way to defeat them after performing a stealth kill. It's a really good detail and it adds so much for me. Now, being the basement-dwelling hermit that I am, I had a look at what detractors had to say about the game, so I could get angry about something, which is one of only 2 remaining emotions I'm still able to experience. And I found someone who said the acting was bad. So fair enough, let's take a look.
Brother, you are a warrior. I can see that. You trained your whole life for this. And you have won battles that lesser men have called unwinnable, yes? But while you were sharpening your sword, do you know how I prepared for today? I learned. I know your language, your traditions, your beliefs, which villages to tame and which to burn. So I'll ask you once again, Samurai. Do you surrender?
I didn't know Tommy Wiseau was still getting work.
Don't touch me, motherfucker.
So as you can see, pretty damn good acting. Also, I love the actor playing Koten Khan. Not only does he have the whitest name ever, but he is also mainly known for playing this guy. That somehow makes him more terrifying.
I'll ask you once again, Samurai. Do you surrender?
So yeah, as it stands, everybody on board does a molto bene job. And I want to make a point, by the way, this game has some of the most like visceral and believable screams I've ever heard in a video game. Like, just take a listen.
Koten-kan! Open the gate!
Yikes. Okay, so like I mentioned at the beginning, the characters are the real bread and butter of the story. So Ishikawa is the salty old man who takes no shits. Masako, who's overcome with the need to burp into the microphone. I'm looking at the waveform now, that was fucking crispy. Nice. Masako, who's overcome with the need for vengeance at the loss of her family. And Kenji, as the shit-eating, sake-brewing conman that acts as their comic relief.
Lord Sakai! My prayers have been answered.
I'm a big fan of how his mission... Look at me drinking while recording. I'm a big fan of how his missions function very much as like episodes of Everybody Loves Kenji, in contrast to the more hard-boiled stories of the other characters. To me, the world feels a lot more realistic when you have more than one emotion outlining your story. But don't worry, I'm gonna start complaining now. A strangely obvious, well to me anyway, missed opportunity is that you never see these characters interact between each other, just with you. So, bar very fleeting chunks of dialogue, where everyone is coordinating an attack in a story mission, I was disappointed to never see, say, Ishikawa deal with Kenji in a mission, for example. With such a well-realised sidecast, I just love to see the type of antics that would arise. I'm asking for a Ghost of Tsushima sitcom, basically. And while I did enjoy all of these missions, some of their stories fall a bit flat. So, spoilers here for Masako's quest ending. So you might not care. Honestly, just take your time. It's cool. I'm cool. So, Masako's questline involves her tracking down her family's killers. She has arguably the coolest penultimate mission of any questline, where she gets a wee bit upset and tries to kill you, and you fucking smack her, and you get this cool line.
Masako, don't ever try to kill me again.
But finding out who's actually behind the killings is not done particularly well. So it turns out it was her presumed dead sister behind it all along. Whatever, who cares? And she's this ridiculous, like, Machiavellian character.
You have taken everything!
Daughters and grandchildren. Not nearly enough.
So her sister, essentially, is jealous that she didn't get to marry into the Adachi clan like Masako. Unknown to Masako, the marriage she arranged for her sister, Lady Hana, turned out to be an abusive one. She was forced to live up in the snowy hills away from the rest of her peers with a drunkard of a husband. So instead of Hana telling her sister or anyone else how miserable her life was and getting help, she, get this, she says nothing to anyone and then murders her entire extended family. What? Masako doesn't even know about any of these feelings?
Why would she want to destroy your clan?
I don't know.
So much so, the reasoning for Lady Hannah's betrayal is only pieced together by our protagonists on their journey to confront her during the final mission. Which is kind of indicative of the structure of other character questlines. They're maybe 6 to 9 missions long, but the story only begins to open up during those final missions. The majority of your tasks starting off are taking care of smaller, expository characters and brief combat encounters that feel more like busy work than a character's personal tale. So anyway, literally a minute after being introduced to our comic book villain Hana, she meets her end at the hands of Masako. Well, she does the deed herself, but it's like 6 1/2 dozen. The emotional takeaway for Masako's quest is supposed to be, oh no, I have lost everyone in my family, even the batshit crazy ones. But for the player, it's more just like a jarring sense of confusion that for almost 10 missions and barely any foreshadowing, the mastermind behind the murder of Clan Adachi was an emotionally constipated psychopath whose story will probably be on a Netflix original true crime series in a year or two. It's a really weird pitfall considering how competently the rest of the game deals with character subtlety, and yet Masako's sister's one pair of welding goggles away from being Dr. Octopus.
You've come to kill me, so finish this. It will be your only kindness.
Yuna's questline, while generally a lot more engaging and to the point, also suffers from a bit of an underwhelming conclusion. So her quest takeaway is supposed to be whether Jin's tactics have instilled more fear in the people of Tsushima than the Mongols. It's a bit cliche. Honestly, I'm just happy it was in a side quest so the main story could focus on our interesting characters. And while it's admittedly set up relatively well, you do make quite a gruesome display of some traitors. It doesn't really hit home considering the people you've just killed at the time are 3 slavers and a child molester. Not a child molester who gave to AGDQ or slavers who went caroling on the holidays, just some of the most reprehensible people in society. So pondering the morality of murder is kind of overshadowed by how irredeemable the nature of our victims are. Regardless of some of the missteps that are in the side character questlines, I can't fault the main story very much. It's all done pretty fantastically. Now maybe it's not the most complex story ever told, but what's there is performed very well and has lots of genuine emotional moments. So in summary, yeah, there is a plot where you will pursue the Khan, but it's the journey of Jin into the Ghost of Tsushima and the loss of the only family he had left along the way that's really the story, you're going to be taken away.
Now you will carry on his legacy.
Okay, everyone's going to leave this video because I'm about to make a comparison to Dark Souls, but just give me a second, I'll explain, don't go anywhere. But I think Ghost has the near perfect blend of the Dark Souls and Batman Arkham games combat styles. It has purposeful combat and enemy design, with bosses you can't just bluff your way through, and the basic moveset of light attack, heavy attack, dodge, block and parry like the Souls series. But it also has the stylish power fantasy combat of the Arkham games, with the increased mobility and the quick throwing, crowd controlling gadgets. An often thrown about phrase back then when the Arkham trilogy was still relevant was that playing the combat skillfully had the inherent satisfaction of making you feel like Batman. And Ghost of Tsushima is exactly the same. When you play well, it really makes you feel like Batman. Like Japanese Batman. Like weeb Batman. In truth, the standard game is probably too easy. If you're gonna go through it, I would recommend playing it in hard. For the majority of the time, it won't actually feel difficult outside of important duels. Hard is just more like the you have to actually pay attention difficulty. Regardless of the difficulty you set the game to, the combat comes together to always provide a challenge during the duels. These are the fights I found myself having to sit forward in my seat to actually get through. They function as the boss fights of the game, and unless you come to some optional duels when you're very late game, they'll always provide a decent test of your skill. The pinnacle of the game's presentation and swordplay has to be the 6 Blades of Kajiro tale. It's 6 picturesque duels through Act 2 with Ronin who want you dead for reasons I either can't remember or were not explained to me in the first place. They're the prettiest, hardest and most rewarding battles of the game. Sadly, they culminate in a final battle with this random dickhead who I thought would have some cool story behind them. Maybe he has some innate hatred of samurai after their failure to protect his family or something like that. But no, he's just a crazy boy.
I've killed 1,000 men. Every death was sweet.
He ends up looking like Swiss cheese like the rest of them though, so I won't complain too much. The rarity of these duels are part of what makes them special as well. You'll only find them as a part of aforementioned mythic tales, some character missions, and emotional moments in the story. So when you duel someone in the story, it's usually under pretty emotional or intense circumstances with a very important character, which makes the standoff intros all the more effective. You know, many parts of Ghost can feel like really great systems that are just short of being amazing because they play it too safe. For example, the enemy design, right? The enemies do get more difficult and aggressive, but never more unforgiving. So like I mentioned, bar the duels where you'll get your reflexes actively tested, if you get caught off guard by a standard enemy, you're going to be able to recover without that much bother. Like the Ronin, which are my favourite people to fight, have a more extensive moveset of unblockables and they'll feint attacks every now and again. But as you can see, by the end game, I can take care of any of them without any bother. And I'm a big fan of the power fantasy, but there's a glimpse of what could have been by a little accidental mechanic I discovered, right? You're able to feint in Ghost. I made a whole video about it on like my kind of smaller second channel. But if you press block midway through an attack, you can animation cancel sword strikes to act as a feint. And it works with like limited success. I say limited because the idea with feinting is that you're trying to bait a reaction out of the enemy to punish them. I used to play For Honor quite a lot, and in that game feinting's an explicitly taught mechanic that allows you to get so creative with the mind games you're able to pull off on your opponents. The game becomes so much more tense and interesting than just dodging and attacking. But while testing this in Ghost, I noticed that even if enemies were able to predict attacks for me, I'm always able to recover. In an ideal version of this game where enemies can predict and punish your moves, feinting would be a necessity, and opening up new tactics and ways for players to express themselves is always welcome in my book. That is why for the most part, combat outside the duels is decidedly easier, and the best missions involve charging into giant crowds of Mongols with your friends, where the power fantasy spectacle is the focus and not subtle decision making. There ends up being a pretty wide variety of ways you can kill things in the game, and while the variety is refreshing, it makes for a really weird difficulty curve. So at the start of the game, it feels quite easy, you don't have that many options, but neither do the enemies, and a headshot with the bow can take anyone down. Then people get armour and helmets, which makes things trickier, but by then you'll have bombs, flame arrows and better stealth. Then you might do a story mission where stealth isn't an option, but you have upgraded how many enemies you can kill in one standoff, and you have smoke bombs. So at points it can kind of flip-flop between too easy and then challenging, but this feels like an unavoidable side effect of how much variety you're given in the combat. And given the option between this sometimes wavering difficulty and the amount of gameplay variety you're given, I'd always prefer the variety. You know, much like my physics degree, some things in the game don't feel as useful as I expected. not a joke. But I was impressed to find that by the end of the game, if you have the right armour and charms, there's pretty much a build for everything. So when I first unlocked the Way of the Flame, which makes all your sword swings unblockable and does fire damage, it wasn't quite as powerful as I expected, so I ended up ignoring it. But if you have a build which blanket boosts your attack power, it's a great way to chew through blocking enemies without changing stances. I didn't use kunai very much at the beginning either, but with technique point upgrades, a charm that allows me to throw 2 extra kunai, and a combo of armour and other charms that boost my ghost weapon damage by 80%, you can just Naruto your way into a crowd, killing 5 enemies instantly. Likewise, I was initially pretty underwhelmed with the fire and explosive arrows. You'd think they'd be a pretty much one-shot kill, but the burning status they inflict usually wears out before the enemy can die. But then I did a side mission and received the charm that both prolongs the status effect duration and their damage by 50%. So now one explosive arrow can kill an entire convoy at once. And I only discovered this particular loadout yesterday, and I platinumed the whole game. But as I'll go into in a second, there's some notable failures in some mechanics, but for the most part, what initially struck me is subpar abilities are, in fact, mostly well balanced for a lot of build diversity. You know, for as much as I love this game, which I think is pretty obvious that I do, it's strange to play such like a well-crafted experience that also somehow manages to have such obvious problems. Like, you ever experience something in a game and you instantly think, oh my god, how did anyone think this was alright? Because I've played so much of this game, and I love it to bits, but the moment I used the bow for the first time, my reaction was, oh, I'm having a stroke. If you've played any third-person shooter since 2007, you know that you move the stick in a circle, the camera moves in the circle. Not in this game. There's like heavy, unwieldy acceleration, different sensitivity on the horizontal and vertical axis, and importantly, no way to change any of it. So what looks like this in any other game, looks like this in Ghost. It feels horrible. The strangest thing to me is Sucker Punch's previous, 3-4 games, the infamous series, all rely on third-person shooting, and none of them have this problem. Like, the camera works fine. So how did you make 3 games with a mechanic that works and then forget how to implement it? I'm sure there's some high-level complicated bureaucracy behind it all, but I don't care about that. I will bitch about this until the end of my angry baby gamer days. Or at least until they patch it in. That's all I'm asking. Really, just wee slider. Let me change it. Thank you. Cool. Next point. Oh yeah, another strangely obvious problem, which I'm sure you'll know about if you've played it yourself. In a game so reliant on customizing both your charms to fit your playstyle and your samurai fashion to fit your style, there are no loadouts. So if you played the game, you probably just went, oh my god, right? But for those who haven't, let me just show you an example. So I'm wearing the Traveler's Armour because it helps me find artifacts. Shut up, John, shut up. Right, so it's taken me so long to make this video that in between all this time, they announced that they were going to patch it in, which is great, but I still wanted to keep this part in because I don't know how this game shipped without loadouts. I took footage. It took me a minute and a half to change all my stuff. That's not taking into account like changing your saddles and your bow, vanity gear, and also is the organisation of all these items. They suck absolutely poo-poo balls because everything's in a list, but it's not ordered alphabetically or by style, except it kind of is. Like some hats that look similar next to one another, but others aren't. Or the blue, the headband of Undying is the blue one. Like, I can't remember that. It's not in a grid where it's organised by style. Or it's just kind of fucking annoying to sum up. I don't like it and it annoys me. So I saw some reviewers duck points from the game for this, and while I do agree it is a problem, it didn't make the game less fun for me. Just kind of frustrating at times. The game has no lock-on. The biggest frustrations you're going to have while playing Ghost of Tsushima is very likely going to be Jin Sakai refusing to hit the enemy right in front of him, because while the game has automatic lock-on, it's not good. So in the Souls games, you have to position your character very deliberately such that you know your attack animation is going to connect with the enemy. But Ghost has a kind of similar style to other character action games like maybe Enslaved or Castlevania Lords of Shadow, where the game will kind of glide you into a better position if you're close enough to an enemy. So Ghost does this for both you and your enemies, but it is so inconsistent that sometimes the spirit of Michael Jackson will travel into Mongol soldiers to dosho you from literal meters away. While Jin puts aside his quest to liberate the island to play Beat Saber next to invaders. Every button on the controller is used in Ghost, but lock-on really should have been a priority. So I'm putting this at the end of the section, but it's easily the biggest objective problem I think the game has. And as far as I could see, it was a lot of the reason that some people just didn't like it. A lot of the mission design just feels really antiquated in 2020. So fucking cast your minds back, kids, to when Sucker Punch released Infamous 2. And with it, there was like this mission creator feature where you could make your own custom missions and share them online. But it was pretty simple. You could only really organise prop and enemy placement, but the goals you could lay out weren't particularly creative. It was things like do a race, talk to this person, burn down a 5G tower. Classic stuff, you know? And Ghost of Tsushima feels like it very much picks from that same list of preset objectives. There are exceptions, but for most of the time you're going to be walking to a place with a person, scanning it out, and killing some people. And I'm not saying that's not a fun thing to do. I kill people all the time, and I have lots of fun. But with this being open world game number 11 billion, I feel like game developers really just need to get more purposeful with their mission design. The worst offender and blanket most boring use of your time will be the tracking missions. So in some missions you're going to have to investigate an area, and you have to find 2 to 3 clues before Jin will say a voice line, and then you follow some mud tracks. And it's one of those annoying situations that even if you find the muddy footprints and try to follow them before examining them, where the game wants you to first, the game will just tell you you're going the wrong way. These missions are not uncommon, and are easily the most boring, lazy part of the game. I don't get it. Like, in a world so full of detail and beauty, why are there missions where I'm required to stare at the ground to progress? A game should let its strengths dictate its design, right? I mean, when I put it like that, it seems pretty obvious. Like, if I was playing Gears of War, it'd be pretty weird if a large chunk of the game was half-baked racing levels, or if Ratchet & Clank had stealth sections where I couldn't fire a weapon. I just realised it does, and those are the bits I don't like. God damn it. What's particularly odd is the designers understand this to a certain extent. Like I mentioned earlier, Ghost gives you lots of options in how to approach situations, and a very minute amount of missions explore different restrictions on this. So for example, I won't spoil too much, but late in the game you have to break into a castle to deliver a message unnoticed, and without killing anyone. And given how easy stealth kills are, and the amount of verticality and freedom you can move with at this point in the game, it's a really satisfying change of pace to play with a purposefully stealthy approach that you can't just slash your way out of. So I suppose the problem of some boring missions isn't really the main issue, as much as it is a byproduct of the developers not creating engaging and different content, leveraging the game's best qualities. Which is a really long way of saying, it ain't as good as it's supposed to be. In a world as beautiful as this, it's such a waste that I would spend time following tracks in the mud, or doing the old Grand Theft Auto, hey, follow this guy but don't get too close, but don't get too far either. Enjoy the 4-minute walk that you can't skip and isn't fun. The game's at its best when it's being a beautiful and stylish samurai simulator, and it's most of the way there already. You've got shrines, onsens, haiku, legends of folklore, and the greatest achievement in terms of melding theme with gameplay that people like, the duels. And to give them credit, the co-op campaign and online horde mode they're adding where you play as the Legends of Tsushima is a really smart in-world way of legitimizing a more like stylistic, over-the-top combat style that doesn't take away from the grounded storytelling of the single player. But it does just feel like the tip of the iceberg. You can't meditate to pass the time of day. You can't feed or interact with your horse. You can't have tea at an inn you saved from the Mongols. You can't help rebuild ravaged towns. You can't peacefully fish. Where's the Sega Bass fishing? Jesus. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that all of these things are essential, but my point is, how much you can do with the setting that is left out for boring, safe game design. Like, just to go on a wee bit of a rant here, Breath of the Wild's freeform climbing would work a treat in a world as grand as this. The climbing is laughably restricted and barely requires any more input than pushing the analog stick in a single direction most of the time. The Inari shrines are all climbing challenges, but they're essentially Ghost's version of the Ubisoft Tower. And with freeform climbing, it would turn these turn-off-your-brain time sinks into genuine exploration challenges. And I can't help but think as well how well the Shadow of Mordor games' Nemesis system would work in Ghost as well, replacing orcs with Mongols of course. Regardless though, I can't really disagree with people who don't like the game because of its old school mission design. And the other side missions that are not specific to our main posse of side characters that I was talking about earlier are short and pretty basic. Some touch on some nice themes, but you're not going to be getting anything near the amount of fun and creativity from what you got from, say, the side missions of The Witcher 3. There's some other problems with the game that don't bother me nearly as much, but they just feel like odd choices, kind of weird decisions. And I don't want to be here all day, so let's fire through it, kids. Number 1, the terrify mechanic. It's not very good. So simply put, some abilities have a chance to terrify enemies where they'll get scared and run away, in an often quite hilarious, like, fucking Benny Hill fashion. But it's very easy to make a build where literally 50% of the time you kill an enemy, everyone will run away. So the better you get at the combat, the less you get to do it. Which is a shame because the legend of the Ghost tying in with the gameplay is really nice. Maybe if terrifying enemies made them easier to parry or knock down first, after which some would have like a low % chance to run away, would be a nice balance. But right now it's just a kind of bit boring. Number 2, oh my god, you can't remap controls and your tiny little fingies are probably going to get sore because of it. So like any third person game, you're going to be pressing the left stick forward a lot. And unlike The Witcher 3, when riding your horse, you can't just press the sprint button and have him go into cruise control. So you're going to be pressing the left stick forward even more. And also use sprint by pressing L3. Put this all together and you're going to end up with my dad's arthritic-ridden left thumb if you plan on playing this game for any period of time. So I'll give you a really useful tip, okay? Go into the PS4 accessibility options and swap L3 for R1. Now you can run with R1, use ghost weapons with L3. You'll be using the ghost weapons far less frequently than sprinting. It ain't the best solution, but once I changed it, my hand felt so much better. Hopefully Sucker Punch start to get on the accessibility bandwagon like Naughty Dog soon, because this is... It's just, why isn't this in the game, you know? Oh, number 3. Jin jumps like a drowning man. The combat and world design are so grounded, but somehow amongst this, Jin Sakai is the secret third Mario brother. Like, it works, yeah, but I was very surprised the first time I jumped how obviously infamousy his jump is. Okay, number 4, the climbing is floaty and basic as hell, like I mentioned. Number 5, the hook feels really good. It's really fun to use. It has a great sense of momentum, but it's really underutilized. I thought you could be able to use it to like smack people in combat, or, you know, I was mentioning about the freedom of Breath of the Wild's climbing. Could I not do that with the hook? No, you can only use them at the hook points. It's basically a red keycard for a red keycard door, which is a shame because when you do get to use it, it is a lot of fun. Number 6, this is a common one. Switching stances quickly will very often not work at all. If you see me randomly jumping in the middle of combat, it's most likely me trying to switch stance, and then the game is shitting the bed. So to switch the stone stance, I have to press R2 and then X, but if I press R2 and then X before the HUD has a chance to pop up, the game will have Jin jump instead. And this rarely costs me a battle, but breaks up the pacing, and with such fluid combat, it's a shame to be denied your style points because the game can't keep up with how much of an elite gamer I am. You know? Jeez! Number 7, the game will stop you if you use the wrong stance on the corresponding enemy type. Or at least I thought it did. Okay, so when I started the game, if you used the wrong stance on the wrong enemy type, use stone stance on a shield guy, the game will pause itself and be like, hey, you bloody wanker, you're using the wrong stance, and it's very annoying. But then on my like 100% platinum file, I did it, and the game never stopped me. So maybe it stops doing it at one point. It happened to me. It's kind of annoying. Maybe it'll happen to you. I don't know. Number 8, pausing in combat will very often result in you getting hit, because when you unpause the game, the enemies still have time to attack you before you can see the screen again. So please don't do that. That is annoying. Thank you. Number 9, merchants aren't visible on the map. So I can see the settlement I'm in on the map, but not the locations of the merchants it contains. And with how vague some of their symbols are, like, what the fuck? Do you know that this would be the sword guy and this is the armor guy? Oftentimes, if you're in town looking for some new threads, you're going to be running around for a while if you don't know the place well. Presentation. Right, this game, I'm unarmed officer. This game is just nice to exist in, man. Like, I didn't platinum this game because I'm obsessed with being the ultimate gamer. But I kept loading it up just to have an excuse to roam through pretty fields again. Like, Tsushima is full of colour and motion like nothing I've ever seen in a game. No matter where you are, there's always something moving on screen to make things feel alive. The game has both dynamic weather and a day and night cycle, and while the dynamic lighting doesn't look as technically crisp as the baked lighting you see in stuff like Spider-Man or The Last of Us, the moment-to-moment atmosphere it can create is far more impressive to me. Roaming around, eliminating camps and exploring can feel so atmospheric and different based on what the weather is. Sometime I'll be charging into a base, I back my trusty Nobu, best horse name by the way, clad in noble samurai armour, destroying the Mongols head on, and then elsewhere in a swamp I'll be slitting throats in the dead of night through a blanket of thick fog. Moments like this make you feel like you're playing a horror game where you're the monster. It's the balls. Thankfully, the game knows its strengths lie with its presentation, and it gets pretty creative with it. By collecting singing crickets, you can unlock flute songs to change the weather, which are a peaceful joy to watch. And there's some fantastic detail where the more ghost-like and dishonourable your actions you partake in, like stealth kills and bombing and poisoning, the more intense the weather becomes, with storms beginning to brew the further from the samurai path you stray. And some of the more creative leverage of the game's colour palette, a couple of missions will require you to go on a treasure hunt, where you have to find areas of specifically coloured flowers if you want to find the next clue. And searching for fields of lavender by using the environment feels a lot more engaging than searching the screen for UI indicators. And it's exactly what I meant earlier when I talked about the game utilising its strengths and settings to influence its gameplay. A few hours into the game I was wondering how Tsushima would keep environmental variety, but somehow they managed to do it through all three acts. The lower portion of the island is mostly pretty fields and rolling hills. It's the most Instagrammable part of the game, except for the occasional dead body hanging from a tree, that is. Which I have since found out is not a normal thing to hang from a tree. Japan, eh? What a strange country. The middle of the island then opens up to much more marshy lands full of flooded paths and mossy overgrown architecture, and then you'll end up in the snowy north with grand frozen mountains and wildlife that has been destroyed by the Mongols. The sound design and voice acting are excellent as well, like I mentioned earlier. I won't say much about it, but just have a listen. Oh yeah, and another thing, the guy who plays Lord Shimura is this guy. I mean, black don't crack, eh? Well, my girlfriend's Asian and she says it's Asian don't raisin, but that doesn't even technically rhyme, and I will never trust the message of a half-hearted rhyme. The music's pretty good. It's good. The music's very cinematic. It's not the type of thing you'd listen to on Spotify. I just wish there was more songs with dramatic use of the shamisen, this thing. Solely because of this little shamisen sting that plays when you find a pillar of honour, and it's the coolest piece of music in the game, and I never got tired of hearing it. But while the presentation is one of the game's strongest suits, it's also its weakest. Such a wordsmith, man. Such an intelligent online reviewer. Jesus, I'm going to sip some wine. It's not wine, it's Blackcurrant Robinson's Stilton juice. While the game exceeds in art direction and authenticity, it really falls behind in the technical department. I've thought for a while now that games, in terms of fidelity, look so fantastic that while there are still major jumps in visuals we can make, like ray tracing and full 4K, it's really on the developers nowadays to just put in as much work as possible to get that detail to make AAA games stand out. Like, the newest Metro has ray tracing, but the animation quality you see in Red Dead and The Last of Us 2, like, feel next gen to me. The quality wavers, as you might expect, from cutscene to cutscene, so important cutscenes like the intro battle have, like, amazing facial animation, and so much detail and all these high quality models. But outside of those, many characters all seem to use the same kind of set of generic animations. Both 60-something Masako and Ishikawa have the exact same run cycle as any other peasant, to the point where it can look a little bit... You won't see much of the great, like, weighty animation from the likes of The Last of Us 2 and Red Dead 2, like I mentioned earlier. You know, details like a character's gait changing as they climb stairs. Oftentimes the angle of their feet will just change and they'll kind of semi-clip through things. It's weird. And like I mentioned earlier, Jin's climbing and jump just don't look right. Like, they function, yes, but in such a grounded, authentic world, I find it really detracts seeing Jin bounce around like an N64 character. But another, like, dated presentation method that I noticed in this game was the use of the camera in side missions. I'll give you a wee example. This is a good quality version where we get close-ups of some handsome, well-animated boys in side missions, and then this Gary's Mod custom camera during the less important interactions. Oftentimes these shots will be very wide and horribly framed, to the point where I don't actually know what I'm supposed to be looking at. I think these shots are like this solely to obscure your view of characters' faces, which presumably they couldn't be bothered animating, or at least animating enough to look good. Honestly, I don't think I'd be nearly as bothered by it if, like a lot of other games, you could just skip or walk away from these conversations. But you can't. In fact, you can't skip any cutscenes in the game. While the dual intros are really cool, they're really long, and after a while you're going to be looking for the skip button just so you can get to the action. In an ideal world, I would have rather there was high quality animation for everything. Even some of the good cutscenes have questionable interpretations of what I think are supposed to be emotions. And you won't see many characters make very much idle movement. Most of the time Jin will just stand there talking with his hands to his side. My guess is this is to bypass the possibility of him clipping through his own clothes, since the game has no way of knowing whether you'll be wearing a slim Ronin garb or chunky samurai armour. But outside of prominent cutscenes, you'll never see Jin point or articulate with anything but his face, which seems like such a waste of great acting. Oh, and speaking of clipping clothes, some of the costumes clip through themselves in the rest of Jin's apparel. Like, a lot. To the extent where I question if the developers took much time to play with certain outfits. Combine this with the wind flowing through your cape, it can look pretty terrible at times. Anyway, like the gameplay, here's some stuff that annoyed me but really didn't break the experience. Number 1, vanity gear takes like a weirdly long time to load. Like, oftentimes longer than it takes to fast travel. Oh, I didn't mention actually, fast travelling is really quick. So that's, Deliveroo was at its peak in 13th century Japan. Number 2, there's not enough information in save files to know which is which. This is important, and I feel like lots of people would overlook this. All the files you see here in front of you are either my original playthrough, or my new game on lethal difficulty. Wait, stop. Credit where credit's due, I did not expect this to get fixed. But on the 16th, Sucker Punch are patching this. So well done. I got my eye on you though. Oh, number 3, I tweeted this at Sucker Punch. Must have thought I was trolling because no one got back to me. The pause screen in HDR is blindingly bright even with the UI brightness set to a minimum. I have the HDR on my TV calibrated perfectly so it doesn't give me headaches or whatever. But even by setting the UI brightness down to the minimum, unless you're playing on a particularly sunny day, you'll probably get a headache looking at the pause screen. Anyway, you can tell at this point I'm kind of being fastidious, but it comes out how much I really enjoyed this game. Like, if I didn't want to start a new game after 100% in it already, I would hardly care about all these fine little details along the way. But it's these subpar technical details that keep the game from feeling next gen to me. Maybe it sounds like a weird thing to say, but Ghost of Tsushima is my favourite open world game of the generation. It has fantastically well acted, well explored characters, and an atmospheric and beautiful world. It manages to succeed where many of its peers fail for me. It keeps moment-to-moment gameplay still engaging after a 100% playthrough, with accessible and responsive mechanics, the lack of which made Red Dead Redemption 2 physically frustrating for me to play. The world lets you take in its lore and its detail at your own pace, never overwhelming or boring you with extraneous knowledge in the way that Horizon Zero Dawn did for me. And while it doesn't match up to the technical achievements of many swan song end-generation AAA games, Its stellar art direction and authenticity more than make up for it. The development of your gameplay style directly coincides with Jin's development of honor-bound samurai into a terrifying Mongol folktale in the way no other game manages to meld its gameplay and story together. But for all its ambition in art and storytelling, much of its mission design can feel notably last gen. That, in a landscape post Breath of the Wild, can feel like just wasted opportunity. What gameplay does take advantage of the setting, fox shrines, wind acting as your waypoint, and the classic cinematic style duels do feel wonderfully distinct and make me more excited what a possible sequel might bring us, now they know they can pull off such an authentic experience. And that was Ghost of Tsushima. I am willing to bet this video will come out on the 15th, and the game will be patched tomorrow. I hope that's correct, or I'm going to look like an idiot. If you guys are seeing this, you got all the way at the end, thank you for watching. This was a long video, but it was kind of like, I originally wrote a 10,000 word script for this, and it was what's the word, shite. It was terrible. But yeah, I really enjoyed this game, and I'm definitely gonna have to make a video after the update comes out. New Game Plus looks cool. You can pet doggos in it. Ow, that was loud. But if you liked it, please, please like and subscribe, and have a good one, yous. Thanks for watching. Bye.